For the vast majority of the customers that we work with, cloud ends up being a functionally necessary prerequisite. All the things you need to build applications quickly and reliably are the same things you need to build AI applications quickly and reliably. I saw a great architecture diagram, some 17 different products that this company had glued together to assemble their AI workflow. And I was like, on Google, I just put Google Cloud, and then I put a circle around it and I'm all done. You see how that's like a little more straightforward?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Modern Web Podcast. I am your host, Rob Ocel, VP of Innovation at This.Labs, joined by my very favorite co-host, Danny Thompson. Danny is the Director of Technology at This.Labs. Danny, how are you doing?
I'm well. I'm here. I'm excited. I think the topic today is going to be pretty good, so let's see how this goes.
Well, fall is almost here, Danny, as of the time that we're recording this, and it is definitely getting cold here now at times in the South. Are you getting any of that down in Dallas, or are you guys still attached to the surface of the sun?
I mean, you got to define the word cold when you talk about Texas.
That's true. Sweater weather for you guys is like 75.
Yeah, it was 72 for a good portion of the day yesterday. So, but I mean, we're inching back towards the 90s now.
That's go start your car and get the heat running in the morning before you go out.
Not for me, though. I mean, that's my favorite kind of weather. I love when it's over.
All right. Well, it may or may not be cool where you are outside, but we have a very hot conversation today talking about AI and cloud and all things related to that with a very good friend of ours, Miles Ward. Miles is the CTO of SADA. Miles, how are you doing?
I am super good. I am here in Seattle where we have resumed our normal state, which is slightly overcast. And if it was 72 degrees, I'd be doing backflips. It'd be glorious if it was that warm here. We are a paltry 68. So I'm hoping for a little of that heat to come our way.
We don't like to call out our different groups of our audience, but for those of you who are watchers of the video version, you may enjoy the background of Miles. He does have many wonderful screens behind him. One of them that is indeed the Matrix visual effect. So enjoy that during the podcast if you'd like.
If you don't have your own private Matrix, what are you doing? Come on, get caught up.
This is the meta. Listen, some people put Subway Surfers at the bottom of their videos. We've got the Matrix running in the background. So if you've got a short attention span, just look at the monitors and enjoy the rest of the podcast.
Blonde, redhead, brunette. It's perfect.
Well, Miles, I mean, listen, you've had such an interesting and fascinating career. So for people that maybe aren't familiar with you, can you let people know, like, kind of the road that you've taken through sort of cloud computing and how you arrive at this position now, being at, with many of us, the epicenter of sort of the AI development phase? So can you maybe walk us through how that path happened?
Absolutely. Three catastrophic failure startups, total implosions, vaporization of shareholder value, the likes of which at least I had not seen. But it was certainly a proving grounds and a learning field for how to build scaled database and internet facing infrastructure. We built a SaaS application before they were called SaaS. And doing that, I was right across the street from the folks that were just getting started standing up AWS. So I was in the first 100 employees in AWS, joined Paul Horvath and Rudy Valdez to join the solutions architect team. We actually named it that when we got together. 5 years of that, or 4 years of that, had a great time, grew revenue something like 1,000-fold. It was ridiculous. And got recruited by Eric Schmidt to come do the same at Google Cloud, founded the solutions architecture practice there. Also grew revenue a gazillion-fold while we were there, helped migrate Twitter to Google Cloud, moved a whole bunch of game companies, helped with the Pokemon Go launch and a bunch of other fun stuff like that. Looked at what solutions architecture demanded and how close we had to get to customers and how expert we needed to be, not only in the Google Cloud part of it, but everything else, the stuff they're coming from to get to Google Cloud. Ended up taking on a role as CTO at SADA. We're Google Cloud's largest implementation partner, a whole bunch of professional services folks and solutions architects helping people get things going. So 6 years in there, we've been purchased by a big integrator called Insight. So now we've got a whole bunch of customers to go help do the same journey and having a great time riding the AI wave as a part of that. It's an unbelievable trajectory from the first times that I was doing deployments with that. When I turned on the first GPU at AWS, something like 14 years ago. So it's a pretty incredible move forward since then.
We're going to talk a lot about AI here, but I thought it would be remiss if I didn't sneak in a question for myself, which is that I feel like there was a moment there with cloud computing where we were seeing a trend of maybe high profile cord cutters basically. I mean, maybe the most prominent of these was like Basecamp, who decided to leave the cloud and go to being on-prem. And this seemed like it was going to presage like a bit of a movement. But I'm guessing that you're going to tell me like what is the reality on the ground? Like, has there been a movement towards it away? Is it plateauing or is it surging? Like, what does cloud adoption look like right now in the enterprise?
So I think there has been, I think repatriation was the label that got used.
Ah,
I build all of my stuff, and now I've decided this stuff is lame. I want to build it on my own computers on-prem. The reality for the vast majority of businesses is the software and the enablement tools that are a part of cloud are so good, and you need so many of them to reproduce in your on-prem system that you have to be absolutely massive in most cases to make that pencil out, with a big asterisk. There's one asterisk, and that's been super, super important in the last couple of years because of AI, and that's GPUs. Turns out, like, putting a rack full of GPUs someplace is just not nearly as hard as reproducing object storage and managed relational database and a queuing system and load balancers and crazy RBAC setups and every other piece you need to make a cloud function. Just of like a bunch of GPUs in a box. And because LLMs are relatively slow, if it takes 2 seconds for you to get the first character back, do you notice that you're 10 milliseconds further away from your data center? No, you do not. So we have a whole bunch of folks that are, rather than moving everything out of cloud, emptying their S3 buckets or bailing out of Cosmos on Azure. That is just not happening in practice. We see about 2.5% of global GCP consumption today, and so I have it on good authority that this is not happening. But certainly there are folks that are purchasing GPUs in an alternative mode, some on their own, building into their existing data center footprints, although that can be very hard for power reasons. We can get into that. But many of them using like neo clouds like Crusoe or CoreWeave or Lambda, things like that, that let them get at a better price point for GPUs directly.
well, we tipped our hand a little bit on this, but my question is kind of how do you get from cloud then to being so in the weeds on AI? What is it that connects cloud to AI so strongly?
Sure, great question. We find over and over again for the vast majority of the customers that we work with that cloud ends up being a functionally necessary prerequisite for a successful AI practice. All the things you need to build applications quickly and reliably are the same things you need to build AI applications quickly and reliably. Conveniently, all the model development is being done in major clouds today. There's no alternatives to that. All of the AI development workflows are being built out in the clouds today. So I saw it was an incredible architecture diagram, and I think it works perfectly, but it showed some 17 different products that this company had glued together to assemble their AI workflow. And I was like, on Google, I just put Google Cloud, and then I put a circle around it, and I'm all done. You see how that's like a little more straightforward, a little more obvious. So Google has this sort of trifecta of superpowers here. They are the only one of the hyperscalers that is making its own hardware devices purpose built just for this work and is running those as the production substrate for its existing systems. They are also building the development and deployment platforms, all the DevOps tools that you need. And they've actually written their own and designed their own foundation models. Gemini is distinct. Like, people give Microsoft a lot of credit for partnering early with OpenAI, but they do not have a Microsoft built foundation model. There's a distinction there. Yeah, Amazon's 1,000 miles from this stuff, right? They seem sort of fairly far behind in it. And for a lot of our customers, having access to that integrated tool platform where everything kind of expects to work with each other and has the same auth mechanisms and permissioning is sort of consistent across those, that's just a load of undifferentiated lame labor that they can bypass and get to the fun part where they're building cool agents that do amazing stuff in their business today. So that accelerant seems like it makes it's not like of course you could do this another way. It's just really, really time consuming.
You kind of mentioned something earlier too, because you have one side where you're given the example of making agents. It's it solves a lot of issues in regards to the time being dedicated to a task and things like that. But then you brought in the other side where in order to set up this infrastructure around it, it may end up costing a lot, or especially if you're trying to do something on-prem. Like what does that balance look like for you for organization at scale? Or maybe if somebody is listening and they want to kind of even mention this to maybe somebody that is higher up than them in a company to take a look at, what would be some considerations there?
Sure. I think most shops, are trying very hard to be efficient with both their capital resources and their human resources. And I like that one of our customers has started calling their AI agent development and management team the Department of Inhuman Resources, which I think is totally brilliant. So okay, you got all those three that you're working for most businesses. There is almost a de minimis number, right? Like tiny number of companies are today saying, hey, the real next step forward in performance for me is training my own model. That is actually super rare. And you probably have a bunch of VC dollars if you're doing it as a small shop to go after it. And so you're going to get a bunch of support from the big cloud providers. They certainly want you to do that there. That's a different market, a different ecosystem, and probably not relevant to 99.999% of the businesses that are out there. For the rest of us, what this is actually about is deploying a model and running inferences on it so that I can do things like write code and serve customers and fix security problems. And that's the spot where if you have set up the application and it all works and it's reliable, and now you just need those inferences to cost less, fine. Now it's time to sort of go down the performance optimization, cost optimization route. I think for big businesses, right, if you've got dozens of departments, you have 15, 20 of these applications being built a quarter, you're underway. There's a FinOps and an operations efficiency team in the back to go, we could just put some of these over here in a box and it would cost us a lot less. That's a absolutely normal, post-deployment optimization step. That is not the thing you do before you get started building apps. That's nuts. That's like buying 100 racks full of computers, even though you don't know where you're going to run them. That's just not a good idea. So for most of our customers, and for every example that I've seen so far, you can build a thing in cloud and do that optimization after the fact in a way that's very seamless. It's very, very efficient. All the software is designed to work that way. The other way around, where if I don't have 5 racks of GPUs, I'm not even going to get started. Like I just think that's we're not seeing that in practice in the market.
We'll be back to the episode in a second, but first I'd like to acknowledge the team behind the channel, This.Labs. We're seeing 3x to 5x productivity improvements with our teams and clients using tools like Cursor, Claude Code, and GitHub Copilot. We help teams adopt these technologies and get max value out of them through strategic partnerships, trainings, and other software engineering services. Check us out at ai.this.co. Thanks. Now back to the video.
I mean, I'm curious about cost on another angle too. I know a lot of companies, one of the big fears that they have, at least if they've thought about this and understand how it works, is like the cost of tokens. I mean, I think like cloud services in general already start from like a thought of I'm worried about my costs getting out of control. But I think token usage is also a thing that a lot of companies are really kind of fearful of, especially at scale, especially over time. We're seeing demand for some of these models be so crushing that I think a lot of people are just waiting until the prices for tokens get jacked up to help tamp down on some of that demand. So there's probably a lot of companies who are thinking, well, why can't I get the nano version of one of these models and we can run it on our own servers and it's good enough for our feature or good enough for our internal tool? How should people plan for the costs of AI initiatives that they're going through and budget appropriately?
So a lot of customers have this question. They're trying to understand, how to work this out, and our cloud providers, they have a vested interest in making sure that this is super easy to understand on their platform. So I helped build the pricing calculator for Google Cloud. My buddy Oleg is running it now. He's the boss. Thanks, nice job, Oleg. And you can type in like, I have this many tokens, they're of these types, this is what it will cost over the course of a month. It will project that out and give you a nice, easy curve. You can go talk to your sales rep about what it costs to handle that. When you do that same thing on hardware devices, you are going to have to get out a spreadsheet because it turns out they're not going to help you do this estimate. So figuring that out can be a little bit, and you have to account for all the other weird costs. So we were talking about power before. Most data centers aren't set up to host the density of GPU devices today. So we're seeing at customers where they get to put 2U of GPU in a 48U rack because it uses all the power for the rack. So you leave 46U for drawers and places to spare spare cables and stuff, right? So that's pretty weird. That's hard for them to fathom. The refactoring of data center facilities to accommodate the power envelope is sort of a really big deal. That's one example. That maintenance and the staff for this stuff is totally different. The networking equipment is very exotic, different than the sort of normal topologies. The kinds of security protocols, because the devices are so expensive, they have a fairly robust resale market. You got to protect it as it comes into the facility in a way that normal computers you don't have to do. So lots of places where I think estimating this in on-prem is just much harder than doing it in cloud. And so I think what you're going to end up with is a lot of companies that go this sort of middle road with a neo cloud provider, a provider that doesn't have any of the other structure of a cloud development environment, but just really vends GPUs by the hour. And that's probably just enough complexity to keep an IT shop, ready to sort of get it all in and plugged, but where they don't have to really roll their sleeves up and figure out all of these nuances. I think that's probably hard for most shops.
This is interesting. This is where I deviate between my thoughts on how to initiate sort of developer and AI enablement initiatives. In other words, when you're going to use AI internally versus like AI features, when you're going to expose AI to your customers. Because I think a lot of products aren't priced from a usage-based perspective, right? That's what tokens ends up demanding. And so I just don't know as a product manager how properly to evaluate, scope, and price an AI feature when I might have power users that figure out that it's useful and drain my entire bucket of resources, versus when I'm using tokens as for my development team and I have a much more direct line to ROI. Like, hey, yeah, you keep using tokens because it produces lines of code and that produces value. That's very straightforward. But if I have a set subscription out of people, it's sometimes difficult for me to understand how to properly plan for and price out an AI feature that I'm going to give to my customers. Like, how do you manage that?
Yeah, I'll react to one of the things you said. Don't ever use line of code as the measure of productivity
Fair
of a
enough.
development team. I promise you, with AI, I can produce an unbelievable number of lines of code that do absolutely nothing. Amazon has a great article that they put out around how they're kind of effectively unit costing the production output. So what is the commercial positive effect of the development effort? And then they can reduce that to AI's influence in the total cost of a given development exercise. That is much more accurate.
Was it
way
Coinbase
to
that got in trouble for flaunting the 40% of their lines of code
right,
AI
right.
generated
It's like,
now?
okay,
They hope
great.
to get it to 50%.
I taunted my boss. I was like, hey, look, if you want to put a real binding financial goal on this, I am happy to bankrupt the business, because I will absolutely get to 99.99% of the code is written by weirdos and just does infinite
Sure.
loops.
So lines of code isn't direct, but the idea that you can produce product which has a more tangible direct through line from tokens to value than maybe a feature that you're not getting usage-based metrics or usage-based payment off of.
I know for sure that this is hard because I have a bunch of customers in this space building products in this space, and the default starting move is to ask your customer to supply their Gemini or OpenAI API key so you use their tokens. Right? Then it's their cost that they run up. And I charge a reasonable fixed SaaS-like linear cost for the software that I have that happens to boss around a bunch of token usage. And I report to you how many of your own tokens you're burning as you use my model. And what that sets up is, if you have your stuff sophisticated enough and you can give me your GPU cluster API key, then marvelous. You can use your own GPU to run the inferences that my application needs. That works great. So I think you're going to start to see patterns like that more often. I think in terms of pricing, you're right back to any place where you would give people an interactive dashboard. And the interactive dashboard could potentially run arbitrary SQL. And now I can consume arbitrary amounts of compute. And if you hand that to a customer, you better have a really nuanced pricing system to ensure that they do not just vaporize your entire balance sheet, because they can.
You said something interesting, and it reminded me of a conversation I had recently. And I don't necessarily know if this was where the conversation was heading, but I think this is an interesting point. So, we're talking about how one factor for business is if you have developers using their own APIs and what those token costs can be, et cetera, et cetera. But the opposite side of this, as a software developer, if you're not in leadership, having developers that are quote unquote more productive has never been something that's an attractant. Like, I've never seen the idea of speeding up to deliver something an exciting aspect of what development could potentially be. And so when a lot of these AI companies are advertising their things of you can output more code and it's just going to cost you X amount of dollars more, and you run your own API key and you're going to end up spending all these dollars on tokens, for example, that's not really attractive. So what is something that a developer should be thinking about, if anything at all, in that regard? Like, why would I be excited about having to now pay for something that I was doing on my own, but I never had to pay for previously?
Sure. I was on a call 2 hours ago with the team that I manage that does work exactly of this type. I said, hey, the Code Assist product from Google is $45 a user a month. You think you're saving 45 bucks? All of them just laughed immediately. Dude, do you know what I'm making? I was like, yes, I know exactly what you make an hour. I was like, I think I saved 4 grand this morning. Like, great. So the reality is, there is deep utility in these tools. It is for builders. I think it makes the process of building more delightful. It has not gotten to a place yet where it correctly reviews the code that it writes. So you still have a gig, you just have a different gig, right? Most of the employees that we work with think of the advent of AI in their role as effectively meaning they just got promoted, right? If you were a junior dev, all of a sudden with these tools, now you are doing code reviews, you are a senior dev, right? If you were a junior product manager trying to talk your boss into things, now your boss isn't going to look at it. You got end-to-end remit to lay out the whole plan because AI will help you write it faster, right? So those kinds of augments, when used appropriately, change the behavior of all of the staff that they interact with, and set those staff up to have a much bigger effect per hour of their effort, right? So I think of this, it's not just artificial intelligence, it's also intelligence augmentation, IA, the other way around. And as a developer, I know I don't get a lot of joy writing the 78th for loop today. That's kind of obnoxious. I get a lot of joy when I see it do what I wanted it to do. And if it can get me to that point more quickly so that I can do what feels indistinguishable from magic to my peers and bosses, I can pull a rabbit out of a hat real time while they're talking to me about it. That's worth the price of admission right there. And I don't expect that most companies will be literally having their individual developers pay for this, but I think everybody should be aware, like, these are new costs that just didn't exist in the business before, and they're going to come from someplace. So you got to be thinking through, how does the business reward productivity? How are you signed up and aligned to the growth of the business? All of that stuff, I think, has an effect of making development, as if it wasn't already moving this direction, getting closer and closer to the profit side of the business, which is, I promise you, where employees want to be. The closer you can tie that relationship, the better.
Yeah, I guess I would just reiterate to people, because it's the advice that I'm giving people, which is that, listen, Ubers used to be cheap too. Airbnbs used to be way cheaper than hotels. There will come a point when the model providers will recapture some of the value that's being subsidized by VC, or some of the space that's being subsidized by VCs. And I think your strategy for AI, both enablement stuff and external features, just you have to skate to where the puck is going. Like, you have to have a plan for how the value you'll get and that your customers will scale with their token usage. Because if the product you're making only makes financial sense in the current environment, you will be upside down probably in a couple years here. I don't know that the tokens will get cheaper, at least not if you're using the mainline models.
That's exactly the point. That's a super critical bit there. The reality is, the most sophisticated, I think it's currently called Gemini 2.5 Pro as a model from Google, is over 100 times as expensive as their production cheapest model. And I know of almost no customers. Several of our customers have worked this out, but almost no customers have worked out the internal AI-based model load balancer that puts the right kind of queries to the right kind of model. Because if you're like, take this block of text and summarize it, I promise you, the crappiest LLM on earth today does that just fine. If you are like, synthesize this whole new concept for me from scratch and then draw a picture of it and turn that into a movie, maybe you need the high-end tokens. So we're helping more and more businesses build this kind of structured evaluator of how they use tokens so that they're using price efficient ones. That feels so similar to where we were with cloud 12 years ago. Everybody just turned on the biggest instance because they didn't want to get hosed. And then like if somebody shows, hey, there are smaller instances and your app will probably work just fine on those too. And so that kind of optimization is coming for all this stuff. I do think that tokens, if you're going to put your air quotes around those, the tokens are going to get cheaper. Mechanically, you cannot put $100 billion of investment annually into the physical facilities that we're talking about that run these things. All of a sudden, we're talking about building nuclear power plants. All of a sudden, we're talking about radically different sort of topologies for the data center buildouts. That's going to have a real world cost reduction on tokens. Now, it depends to be seen as to whether the cloud providers really intend to hand those cost reductions back out to customers. That's a separate question. I'm sure their investors would prefer them to preserve all of that as profit. And that's where this sort of balancing act between on-prem and cloud becomes so critical as a way to force the providers to have a competitive price.
One of the things that we hear a lot of, especially because I think many people that are at the forefront of the AI thing maybe have acknowledged that it feels like in the adoption curve we are maybe sliding down into the pit of despair right now. I think it was the recent Gartner study, some obscene percentage of AI initiatives has failed in the last year. And I think people are somewhat rightfully asking, like, listen, if this was the killer feature that people say it is, where's the company that's standing up at their earnings meeting proudly showing what it's accomplished, what's the feature it built, what's the app it built, And so there's a lot of people that maybe feel like maybe more than they have in the last year, this maybe was more smoke and mirrors than we thought. So there is probably a growing number of people that are feeling maybe what I want to do, maybe my strategy is going to be, I'm going to wait out another 6 months and see if some of this materializes. What is your word of advice to the person who might be thinking that for those reasons?
So I think I don't think you're wrong in the read as to kind of what's happening in the average of the market. I think the closer you get to the technology centers, the more maybe bullish people get. There's a real for almost every business that we've worked with, the big impediment to their success is not that the AI models aren't good enough or AI development is too pesky or hard. It's that their data sucks, and it turned out it sucked before AI too, and probably before cloud it probably sucked in most cases, and it also means that probably their development processes aren't all that mature and their operational practices aren't that great, and they don't really have like a data science or a way of running experiments. We show companies like, hey, like this is science. Some of these aren't going to work. That's their kind of experiments, right? And they go, what do you mean? I want to buy a thing and have it cost 10% less than it earns me. What do you mean? Like so we are at the front edge of these things, and it doesn't surprise me at all. I'm actually rather ecstatic at stats. Like a big percentage of projects are failing. That means people are actually doing experiments. That's what it should look like. If you're up at 80-90%, the market's mature. The home runs aren't going to exist. All this stuff all the value is going to get charged for. It's going to be sort of a lower opportunity space. I think for most companies, even if you decide that the products aren't ready and you need the models to get cheaper and the use cases to get clearer, even though we have unbelievable documentation to what use cases really work well now, the correct thing is to spend all of that time sorting your data mess out, right? You don't get to wait. Just spend the time on something that will pay dividends, even if AI totally implodes, right? If we just prove that LLMs are a totally nuts idea, we're going to turn all these silly GPUs off. If you make your data platform better, you're going to love it. I promise. Plus, it's a benefit to you. Everybody's going to have a better time at business, even if you never use an LM to sort it out. So I would spend the time there.
I love that answer though, because I agree that more than we say this a lot with different trends that come through, especially architectural trends, AI more than anyone I've ever seen exposes your bad habits, both as an individual and as an organization. The amount of times that like teams of senior developers have gotten by with average test suites, no documentation, like, no
Totally.
clear coding standards, and then they get nothing out of AI versus maybe an organization that's much more process oriented suddenly finds that it fits quite smoothly into what they're doing. This is quite a wake up for a lot of teams. And I agree with you that that's one way that people can start to do what they need to do, even if they're not ready for AI, is you need to be ready for AI when it,
Yeah,
when you
one
plug it
one
in.
of the things we looked at, there's a both Harper Reed, buddy of mine who's hyper brilliant, and Simon Margolis, who works for me. They laid out kind of what I think is the right archetype for vibe coding, right? Like here's a way to do that where you actually get something useful out the far side. And most of it starts with doing the things that product managers and engineering managers do before anybody writes any code, which is lay out this whole wall of context. What are you trying to do? Why are you trying to do it? Put that into a structured document that makes some sense. Lay out all the alternatives you explored and abandoned. Do this, think like an Amazon 6-pager if you want a template for something like this. Like squirt out all the business context, and then even go further. Lay out all the possible definitions of the features. Like, you build this wall of English before you get to a single line of code. And we would show this method to some development teams. They're like, ew, why would you do all this work? We don't ever do that stuff. We just get in the IDE and get it on. And I was like, well, how many of your things do you have like change requests from leadership on? They're like, lots, all the time. It's such a pain in the neck. Can you make them stop giving us feedback like that? I'm like, no, you need to actually have a plan. So it turns out there's really a lot where I think what the broader industry has internalized as maybe not best practices, but really good practices for building applications that actually work. It turns out you need that stuff for building AI applications too. And so just like sorting out your data estate and making that usable, getting to a real world and healthy full scope development practice is something that will pay dividends whether you build using AI augmentation or not, right? Like, of course, your developers are going to build more of what you want if you actually show them the whole plan.
Awesome. Well, very quickly, we find ourselves at the end of our conversation. For people that have enjoyed this and maybe want to connect with you online or find out more, where can we send people?
I'm super easy. SADA.com works great. My first name at SADA.com is the shortest email address of all time. Works perfect. Happy to talk shop and see how we can put all this technology to work for your company.
And officially, you are not a college football player.
No, that is correct. So I worked really hard on Twitter. My startup, there's a reason there are those fail whales. So we did a lot of crawling of Twitter in fairly unreasonably aggressive ways. And so I was sad to see it get kind of hellish. So I bailed, and I'm over on Blue Sky, which works good too. So
Awesome.
at milesward.com works fine.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for being here for this episode of the Modern Web Podcast. Thanks to our guest, Miles. As always, we say the conversation does not stop here. You can find Miles and Sada. The links we'll put down in the show notes down below. You can find me online at Robocell. As for Danny, you can find him online at dthompsondev. And for the podcast, you can find us online at moderndotweb.com or on Twitter at modern.web. As we close out, we would just like to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs, one last time, who would like me to remind you that This is dedicated to guiding companies through their modernization and AI transformation journeys. This.Lab is a tech consultancy that specializes in amplifying your technical capabilities, whether it's expanding your dev team with seasoned professionals or streamlining your project's journey from ideation to deployment. We work with clients like Google, Microsoft, PayPal, and more. Check us out at this.co. That's THISDOT.co. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you all next time.